Richard. Richard Clements of Vendex Solutions. I can't really miss that. It's right behind you. Although, having said that, I actually told you before, and I might edit it out, but there's a nice sign of Vendex Solutions right behind you. Richard, it's a pleasure. I don't know how long we have known each other. It feels like I've known you in a good way for an eternity, but it's relatively recently that we got together. Probably the last 5, 6, 7 years or something.
I think it's
We've both been around a little bit longer than that, but hey, we won't go down that rabbit hole. So look, it's a pleasure having you on. I don't know which episode this will be. I'm still sequencing. I'm really picking up tempo on the number of episodes I'm doing on David Anderson talking market data, the show. We'll have a song. Actually, you need to write me a theme song for
you know what I will
do. We'll sing that at the end. Or yes, you don't want to hear me singing. So look. As I always do, we're gonna talk about a few topics further in, but let's kick off by, first of all, I'm going to put your LinkedIn profile and I'm going to put the website of Vendex Solutions up on the description. But can you just tee that up? Who is Richard Clements? Why should we bother listening to you? And secondly, Vendex Solutions, plural. What are they all about?
Well, David, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for choosing me as one of your interview subjects for your show. I know you've had a lot of pretty heavy-hitting individuals on your show, so it's exciting to be part of that crowd. Some of the names you mentioned before were people that I admire in the industry. So a little bit about me and a little bit about Vendex. I started my career as a bond trader, and from there, I started going into startups. I designed and built the very first interdealer trading system for Fed funds and time deposits in the United States. That was bought by ICAP many years ago. I then built another one, Global Liquid Markets, which is now GLMX, which is an ongoing concern. I've been a senior executive at both Bloomberg and Thomson Reuters, or Reuters, Thomson Reuters. So I was there throughout that merger, working for John Robson and, of course, Tom Gloser.
Yeah. I remember it well.
Yeah. And so at Thomson Reuters, I was in charge of the credit crisis team. So I ran the credit crisis team under John Robson. Globally, I was responsible for all the regulatory and central bank relationships around the world. I was responsible for all the RFIs and RFPs that came out of that. And then at Bloomberg, I ran Market Transparency, which was a group that was built under my coming into the firm, and that included the message mining,
as in Bloomberg Messenger,
as in Bloomberg Messenger. Yeah. So at the time, this is now 10 years ago. At the time, the average buy side trader was getting anywhere between 10 to 15,000 messages a day, and there's a lot of we own an offer type stuff. So salesperson would send out salesperson at a sell side institution would send out what they would own and offer. And we covered all at the time, and this is relevant to what we're going to be talking about. But at the time, we covered all non-exchange traded instruments. So foreign exchange, all of fixed income. So fixed income, everything from munis to corporates to asset-backed securities, private equity markets, commodities, a number of stuff that, again, was traded off exchange. One of the things that I was responsible for doing at Bloomberg was making sure that Bloomberg had the rights to the data to be able to use the data internally and remarket it. So, for example, Bloomberg has a valuation service called BVal.
Yeah.
And a good friend of mine ran that at the time. I had to make sure that he had that group had all of the appropriate documentation to be able to utilize the information that was coming through the Bloomberg system to be able to publish those prices.
So that would have been under the vernacular rights management. I'm very consciously missing the D, the digital bit, because we're going to talk about that later. But that was the just pure rights management.
That is correct.
And that is correct. Obviously, we're going to talk about digital rights management later, which is obviously how the whole thing's evolved. So talk us about how you got into Vendex.
When I left what was then Global Liquid Markets, or GLMX, I started a consulting company, International Solutions Network. And at International Solutions Network, we've worked with most every large vendor in the world. What we did is we had a number of It was a consulting company, and I
Yeah.
had a number of different consultants that would go onto these projects. One of the things that we did is we helped the European Central Bank build the European Data Warehouse, which is a post-credit crisis information depository of loan-level data for asset-backed securities. And at the time, what the European Central Bank did is they had mandated that if you wanted your asset-backed securities to be repo eligible with the ECB, that the loan level data had to be at the European Data Warehouse. So to kind of break it down a little bit, let's say asset-backed securities cover the repackaging of, home mortgages, which we know, commercial-backed mortgages, student loans, credit cards, airline leases, equipment leases. And so the idea is during the credit crisis, there was so many transactions, but a lot of the people that were buying these assets didn't have access or didn't know what was in the packages. And when some of these things started to default, the European Union, I think, did a great job of sort of saying, let's not crush the industry, although the industry was hurt for a little bit afterward, but let's make it more transparent. And the European Data Warehouse was born. We at ISN helped build that. So my team not only helped build it, we built the commercial models, but more importantly, we also negotiated a lot of the contracts.
Got it.
And these are the data contracts. So there are two interesting things about that. One is that you are bringing information from a multitude of European countries into a single repository. All of these European countries have different privacy rights with regards to data, with England and Germany being on one extreme and the Netherlands being on the other, as far as the transparency of the data and the protection of that data. So that was relatively interesting. And I will say, I want to give a shout out to one of my mentors, Nancy Gardner, who was general counsel at Thomson Reuters and is now at S&P. I believe she is general counsel for the index business there. I have learned so much from her about rights management and just the negotiating of contracts and the thinking about data usage rights, which we'll hopefully get into.
She's a lawyer. A lawyer.
She's a lawyer. Yeah, she is.
Maybe I need a lawyer on my show, so maybe I'll have to get an
Is.
introduction.
I would love to. B, I mean, she may have limitations because she's at S&P. I will say that, but interestingly enough, she's just brilliant, and I'm so happy to have had her as a mentor in my career.
Vendex. Let's get to Vendex.
Let's get to that.
Yeah.
Well, and so I'm sort of getting there. So at ISN, as I mentioned, we negotiated a lot of data contracts. So not only for the European Data Warehouse, but also for some of the very, very large firms. We would come in and take a look at the contracts with regards to data usage rights, and we would help the source firms negotiate these. And this is kind of the genesis of where Vendex came out of. Vendex came out of the consulting company that I've run for approximately 15 years. And the reason I bring that up is because in Vendex's view, we have categorized vendors in two general buckets. We have source vendors and aggregate vendors. Not to say an aggregate vendor can't be a source vendor, but a source vendor creates data.
Yeah. The classic example being the exchanges.
The interdealer brokers, and in a lot of cases, the banks. Yeah. Because the banks, when they issue a security, have data and information they create, and then aggregate vendors, all the large vendors that we know and love, will aggregate this data, normalize it, and put it on their platforms for people to use. We've worked with a lot of source vendors to negotiate contracts with the aggregate vendors, multi-million-dollar data deals, but also making sure that where our expertise came in at ISN was we were considered experts on usage rights. And there's a little bit of a commercialization of those usage rights. And I'll give you an example. Hey, I want to buy this data for on-screen only. Okay, let's say it's $100 a month. Oh, I want to create a derivative work with this data. Well, what kind of derivative work? Is it a benchmark? Is it some type of analytic? Now we're talking about AI, LLMs, and SLMs. Pricing, valuations, whatever that might be, right? So the concept of adding a commercial aspect to that data, how it's going to be used is a topic that is huge and broad in today's environment.
What we chatted beforehand, but I think we're into this section. I said I was going to ask you, well, What are the problems that Vendex was created to solve? And I think you're in the thick of it already. So
Well,
maybe,
yeah. So no, and so Vendex was born because we found that there were and are existing frictions in the marketplace. The frictions that exist are numerous. Ones that come to mind are clearly understanding what's available, what's out there. The ability to understand and clearly delineate what the data can or cannot be used for when it is purchased or passed through. And the pass through is really critical.
yeah, yeah.
And pass through again is I'm a source vendor. I am selling my data through an aggregate vendor to the third party. And so the third party needs to understand the usage rights that the source and aggregate vendor have agreed upon
There's a sort
for
of
the
almost a compounding effect there. There's the original source, and then the aggregator might apply their own rules in addition or wrapped around the original source data's.
correct. And there's many layers there. And we can get into the nuances there, but we started Vendex because we realized that there are all these frictions in the marketplace. And when we started Vendex, and to this day, our ethos is to eliminate or reduce the frictions in the marketplace. And we have a very unique approach in doing so, in that our goal is to be extremely neutral between the vendors and the consumers of data. So we will not benchmark vendors. We will not rate or rank vendors. We represent all the vendors on our platform equally. On our platform, when it comes to a lot of vendors publish information through our platform, but we don't publish it out until it goes through our style book. And our style book eliminates all superfluous language, award-winning, best-in-class, and promises made by vendors about what if their products will save time, save money.
So, I mean, I just drilling down on that neutrality. So I'm sort of inferring from that there's no judgment there. You've got all these different data providers, all with different types of usage rights, contractual terms. And am I understanding correctly? You're not saying, well, that's a good policy, or that's a bad policy, or that's an easy policy. Your role is to take whatever those policies are and make them understandable and
So
ingestible and workable. Have I understood that?
Yeah. So one of the things I know we talked about right before this was the cataloging. And so we're
Yeah.
talking about cataloging. Now, what we do is we have very pointed definitions. So we differentiate directory from catalog from inventory, right?
Okay.
So, uh,
Define each of those three, if you
I,
would, in
I,
your mind.
of course, a catalog is this is what I have. When you think
Yeah.
about shopping, you go to back in the old days when you used to get cataloged by mail. The famous one in the United States was Sears Roebuck, which unfortunately is long gone, but you would get a catalog. This is what they have. This is what
Have
they
to
own.
sell. What they have to sell. Because
Exactly correct.
when you said that, I would argue that an inventory is what I have. In other words, as the customer, I have bought those things from the catalog and I now have them. Do you follow my?
Well, right. So the catalog is this is me as a vendor providing what I have. You have bought from my catalog and from other catalogs, so you have an inventory, right? We at Vendex Solutions provide a directory. Our directory is a little bit like the yellow pages. We provide everything, or the goal is to provide everything that's available. We're really excited about some of the stuff with our patents on what we're going to be providing in the marketplace with regards to what's available, and some of the institutions of which we are cataloging their data to provide in our directory. And we're getting down to we are unique in that we're getting down to the actual field level.
And a phrase that I've heard bandied around a little bit, I quite like it, is data discovery. That I think a problem that many customers of data, consumers of data have is there's so much data. There's so much data from so many different providers, and there's even more coming out all the time that you don't know, you cannot see in one holistic way all the data's out there and ask. And I presume that's the point of the directory. I presume going to the catalog, the providers would say, well, only buy from us. And effectively, they're providing their catalog as a directory of their services.
Correct. Well, and so one of the interesting things, and this is where, so I'm gonna kind of take a step back and flesh out what I was talking about earlier, and that is how we represent vendors in our directory. And this comes from the experience that we had at ISN, International Solutions Network, the consulting company that I've run, where we would, in many cases, we would do product rationalization and market assessments on existing products, right? So we would get hired by, again, we've worked for all of the large firms. We've done work, and it's fun work. It is for us. What we would do is we would go and say, we would do blind studies. So we would represent a company that had data or analytics, but we wouldn't tell the people we were interviewing in the marketplace. So we would go out and do 100 to 300 interviews with portfolio managers, analysts, salespeople, anyone that was involved in the industry in that specific asset class, asking them about the tools they used, and we would have open-ended conversations. Now, this happened on more than one occasion. We would go into asset manager ABC and we would talk to a portfolio manager or an analyst or a trader or, someone that was involved in utilizing services. And we would say, which services do you use? And they say, oh, we use company A. We'd say, okay, why do you feel company A is better than the competition? And they would give us a litany of reasons, whether it's because of the way they viewed the marketplace and saying we utilize, asset-backed securities have over 200 data fields, right? And they would say, hey, we think that the fields number 7, 112, and 117 are the most important, right? So we use vendor A because we feel that they provide the best data for those fields. Then we'd walk into an asset manager right next door, same type of AUM, look and feel exactly the same as the first one. Not exactly the same, but very similar. And you'd go and talk to an analyst or portfolio manager there, and they'd say, oh, no, we believe that vendor B is better than all the other vendors. And the reason for that is because they have maybe a better analytic or a better, in their view. So what we learned in that exercise is that ranking vendors is very subjective. And it's very subjective on how on what data is utilized to view the marketplace. Now, I started my career as a bond trader. This is way before I dyed my hair white. As a young man, I would trade. I was trading bonds, and I will tell you, every Friday in the United States, I'm looking at the jobs reports. I am looking at every single piece of economic data that may influence interest rates. And I'm old enough to remember when Alan Greenspan used to go into Federal Reserve meetings, and there was this lore about if Alan Greenspan is carrying his briefcase by the handle, it means he's going to lower rates. If he's carrying it under his arm, it means he's going to raise. There was all of this, right? There was all of this rumors.
Let me break down what I think you're saying. Is it a bit like, which is better, a car that has its steering wheel on the left or a car that has its steering wheel on the right? Which is better? Well, I say, hang on, I'm trying to think which way we do have our, I say it's got to be on the right. Having the steering wheel on the right is critical to me. And you, bizarrely, would say the other. Because we're subjectively, I live in England and you live in San Francisco.
Well, and then let's take that a step further. Let's say that for you, a car that has towing capacity is more important than a car that has all-wheel drive, right? You tow things. I need to get to the mountains to go skiing. I need all-wheel drive. You have a boat that you tow. I'm clearly, I don't know.
I wish.
So that I think the neutrality is critical.
But in that scenario, therefore, does this directory just have to list, is it right hand or left hand steering? Does it have a tow bar? Is it, it's just a set of criteria that are clearly written down. In the car world, you talk about stick shift and we talk about manual.
Manual.
So it's the same thing, but we in Britain use a different phraseology to you guys, and it's our bloody language. So,
So, yeah, well, we can talk about where the car was invented.
oh yeah, okay.
No, but so it's very interesting that you say that, David, because what we see ourselves as is we, again, represent all the vendors as neutrally as we can. When we get information from vendors, we currently have just shy of 1,000 vendors that we've cataloged with something close to, I think we're close to 8,000 different products, that these vendors have. And we're going to be getting to the next level of that, which is that we're launching the global data registry in about 8 to 10 months. That will allow for the granularity, and then we can talk about taxonomy and some of that other stuff.
I mean, and just holding you on that, is the value in the sense I could take this this enormous directory from Vendex Solutions, which has everything in it, almost everything, because it's or
we've still got a ways to go. We've identified 4,000 vendors,
which is a pretty darn big lump of the. But could I? It's really only 10 of the vendors I'm really interested in, and I can get the 10 catalogs from each of those. And frankly, I can go through those myself. What you're offering, Richard, is rather nice, but really, I'm not lazy. I'm prepared to go through the 10 catalog. I'm being flippant. I'm trying to.
And I love that because, that happened to us when we first launched the catalog. We were talking to one very large global financial institution, household name, and they said, we're big enough that we can do this ourselves. And then they came back to us and said, here is the problem, is they're not just 10 vendors. And again, when you think about the aggregate vendors and the source vendors, the 10 big vendors you're talking about are all aggregate vendors. Again, all household names, the biggest of the big. Aggregate vendors buy data from anywhere between 1,500 to 5,000 vendors themselves. Right. So it's not just, hey, what do I have? It's what do I have and offer? And it's a little bit akin to fixed income trading back in the 80s. And so I was a fixed income trader and I was at Bank of America. And what would happen back then is a lot of the firms would say, oh, well, now with the advent of the internet, I can put all of my rates on my website. Well, here is the problem is, if I am an institutional buyer, now I've got to go log on to a bunch of different websites to find out what the rates are, right? And the idea in today's environment, and we still do have a couple of vendors that are very like, well, people can get it on our system. There are two things there. One is, while vendors do compete with each other, there are also regulatory standards that make it critically important for the buyers of the data to have more than one source for not only business continuity, but also making sure that they have different data sets of which they can, especially when it comes to pricing data, right? When you're talking about pricing data, we have this whole concept of best execution. We have this whole concept of making sure that you have, again, going back to the credit crisis, a lot of this stuff was marked to model back then.
Yeah.
Well, no, now you've got a mark to market. Well, you need to understand that you need to have different data sources to be able to have an aggregate view of the marketplace as opposed to say, hey, we're going to go to one vendor. And that is the case today.
So this master directory, this primary directory, this overarching directory, we used to have an expression in the UK, which no longer is true, but I'll still use it. Is it a bit like painting the fourth bridge? Have you ever heard that expression?
I have not heard that expression.
The fourth bridge is a bridge that goes over the Firth of the Forth in Edinburgh. It's a long bridge, a railway bridge, all made out of iron or whatever. And they start painting at one end, and by the time they got to the other end, they'd have to start again. Actually, they've got better paint now, so they don't. But the expression implies it's a never-ending job. You're building your total directory. Is that like painting the fourth bridge?
Yes and no. So we're based here in San Francisco. My blinds are down because of the glare that would come in and hit the camera. But the San Francisco Bay is directly behind me, and the Golden Gate Bridge is over there. So the Golden Gate Bridge is the same thing. You paint it, and then you got to repaint it, right? And the whole point is that you're talking about metal and sea salt air. Yeah. The two don't get along, so it has to be constantly painted. So the idea that our job is never ending is true. However, what we're finding is with this next generation of what we're going to be building at Vendex and what we're working with a couple of the large financial services vendors currently. Because of the two patents that we have, or patents,
We
as
talked about that.
we've gone back and forth on what is
Tomato,
correct.
tomato. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure it's patents because again, it's your language, and we're
Yeah.
we're just a forlorn colony out here. Where our technology is coming into play is actually allowing for our patents are not financial services focused; they're data focused.
Right.
So we are currently in discussions with some of the extremely large, again, household name data aggregators, cloud providers, et cetera, in cataloging data to go into the directory that is, it's going to be looking at different industries. So our next generation, once we build this next set of tools in our platform, will be that we can license our identifiers out and collect data from a number of different industries. And we're starting with legal, and then there's going to be, we've been approached by pharma, we've been approached by, there are a couple others, and I can't really talk about those industries.
No.
But the interesting thing for us is our goal is to license our identifier out, and we can talk about the identifier a little bit. But in our marketplace, in financial services market data, we use a term that I think is amusing, and that is alt data.
Yeah. As in
We say, well, it's alt data, it's alternative data. Well, here's the reality for the other industry, it's just data.
I know. What's it an alternative to? Yeah. I mean, yeah.
It's an alternative to what you and I, as market practitioners in this particular industry, we are used to. Well, what is the data? So, the financial services industry is the most mature data market in the world, right? On two fronts. First of all, the electronification of data. If you think about the first electronification of data, it was the ticker tape. You have people literally looking at a tape that was getting printed out on, oh, there's the stock I'm looking for, and there's the most current price, right? And then it's also the most mature in the data usage rates. We're seeing with AI more and more articles, more and more lawsuits with regards to companies utilizing data they don't have the rights to. And that is incredibly interesting for us. And that's where our second patent comes into play.
And that AI and IPR thing is a fascinating topic. But I have heard, just picking up and better understanding your directory concept, which I would link with the whole ultimate need of data discovery. The fact that people have a problem with data discovery, finding the data that they want is the problem that they have, and your directory is a large part of the solution to that. But I've heard people say, well, that's where AI really could find a home. I mean, in terms of all this trawling through all these different data contracts, data descriptions and whatever, and make sense of it all. Isn't that something that AI could do?
So we leverage AI in how we catalog our data, except for the fact that one of the problems that AI has a long way to go with regards to what this is. We implement AI in two of our different products. One of those is helping catalog data, but we have a specific taxonomy that is tied to our identifier, our patented identifier for data. And what that allows for is it allows people to compare apples to apples, right? We also have a very in-depth, what we call synonym dictionary, and that's probably not the most elegant term. But you say bonds, I say fixed income, someone else says rates, right?
Yeah.
And we're all talking about either similar or the same thing. What does that mean? And so we go through and we standardize all of that to a single source, which then will allow for better data discovery.
But when you have that single source, you have a word or a phrase or a code for that. Then you're saying, when somebody says fixed income, they mean this. When somebody says bonds, they mean this. When somebody says fixed interest, when they say FI or whatever it is, none of those phrases are wrong per se.
No, they're not. So what we do is we put a stick in the sand on what we call it. But if anyone is looking for any of that information throughout our system, they can put in whatever they want. It doesn't matter. That's where our synonym dictionary comes into play. Hey, I'm looking
Got it.
for information on bonds. What kind of bonds? Munis, governments, corporates, agencies, and then under asset-backed securities. And then under all of those, there's a whole litany and a whole
Or
string of,
ABS or MBS or municipal bonds or
well, and in municipal bonds, you've got revenue bonds, general obligation bonds, Melrose bonds, and then in asset-backed securities we were talking about earlier, you've got mortgage-backed securities, commercial mortgage-backed securities, airplane leases, credit cards, et cetera, et
I'm
cetera.
going to put you on the spot. I did this with somebody else and I didn't warn them, but I sort of warned you. So you got no
That's all
excuse for
right.
getting it right.
I'm
So
a big boy.
yeah, exactly. So two things I'm going to ask you to define. And by the way, when there are, I mean, no definition is perfect and everything, nobody's right and wrong, but a definition, not the definition, a definition of symbology and taxonomy. Those are two words. You talked about your symbology, which, I mean, is that akin to the RIC code, the QSIP, the CDOL, all these different.
That's it's very interesting because we patented our identifier
Sorry,
very
you use the word identifier, which again, symbology is another phrase which really means identifiers, doesn't it? Or
no, symbology and taxonomy are different than an identifier,
right.
right? So,
I'm
when you're
really
talking,
confused now.
no, okay,
Unconfuse
well,
me.
let's break it down. So when we capture data, what we do is we go through a set of our identifier. So our identifier is QSIP or ISIN like, but we think of it as the barcode for data.
Right.
And when we think about the barcode, that there you go.
Yeah.
Yes, the Max Bowie story. I
Yeah.
thought, and Max is very. I love talking to Max, mostly because he's been in this industry for a
Remind me
long.
to put a link in. If I forget, remind me. A
I
link to
would.
the Max Bowie article,
Yeah, and
barcodes for market data.
he's written a couple. So last year, the barcode celebrated its 50-year anniversary. Barcode was started in the grocery business. The first thing that was scanned with the barcode was a multi-pack of Wrigley's gum. Right. And that was 51 years ago now, because last year they celebrated their 50-year anniversary. Now there is probably no item that is purchased that hasn't been scanned by a barcode somewhere along the way, and usually at point of sale. Right. So when you bought the sweater you're wearing, at some point in time, you took it to a cash register, it was
Yeah.
scanned, and they said, men's small green sweater is 35 pounds or whatever that is, right? So that ability to understand that there is a code that then goes back to decode it so there can be
And
a price.
I mean, a barcode is just a pictorial representation of a number or an alphanumeric, isn't? Is that
That is
correct?
correct. Yeah, it's a UPC.
So what's that?
The UPC is the universal, is it something
What
code?
I'm getting at is ultimately there is a unique alphanumeric representing that thing. I mean, the
Correct.
barcode is just a way that you can scan it quickly, but
Correct.
but underneath is a unique code. Unique being the operative word.
Right. So our code is unique. We have a number of different fixed fields, and then we get into what we call modified fields that our code picks up. So our code is they're alphanumeric characters, and they are delineated. The first, I'm doing this from memory, the
No,
first
no.
five or six characters represent the facing vendor. Then you have whether they're a subsidiary or a parent company, and then you get into the product code, all the different potential ways that product is delivered, the timing of the delivery, and this is all stuff that would eventually go into a contract. And we have a couple of consumers that are asking vendors to utilize the codes for both contracts
And
and for end
don't
uses.
all the suppliers of this data, do they not have their own unique codes, their product codes or
Yeah,
something?
they do. But then, David, this goes back to the same problem. I'm a large financial institution and I'm buying data from 2 to 3,000 vendors. Now I've got to go and look at all the 2 to 3,000 vendors and map to all of their different codes. That's insanity, right? And again, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier. There's an unintended consequence with the number of vendors just in the market data space, right? In the financial services market data space, we have 4,000 vendors that we've identified. We believe that there are over 5 to maybe 6,000 vendors just because of the relationships we have with some of the aggregate vendors that I know are buying
Yeah.
from approximately 5,000 vendors. We're going to start mapping that. So if you are saying, hey, we've got our own. Well, the problem with everyone saying we've got our own is it leaves the consumer, um, it leaves the consumer in a bind, because the consumer, again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. When we first said, hey, we're cataloging all this stuff, and we had a large institution say, what, that's okay, we're doing it. And they came back and they said, wait a second, we would rather you did it, because there's an economy of scale of you doing it once as opposed to us trying to do it. And then, the other financial institutions all trying to do it from thousands of vendors, and it's all spaghetti.
And
Does
I
that?
think your compound, each of your long codes are made up of sub elements, and you
That is
can drill in, probably, I presume you can query at lots of different levels. You say, I'd like to see everything from Bloomberg, or I'd like to see everything from S&P, or you could say, I'd like to see everything about a particular bond, which might come from multiple vendors.
Well,
And
so
therefore,
we don't. Yeah. So I want to be clear. We can show you information from a specific type of bond, but we are not in competition with CUSIP or ISIN or RIC. We have
right?
no interest in saying, I am looking for information on Safeway 7%, callables of 2035. That is an instrument specific. But what we do say is, who has corporate bond data? And
And
is it
so what?
reference data or is it pricing data you're looking for?
So what sort of queries? What are the sort of queries that are possible with your solution?
Well,
How
it's
might people use it?
so I want to be clear also. So we're building out this next generation of the system where people can use it, where people will be able to use it in the next year, is to go into query and say, I am looking for all of the providers of data on a specific instrument, for example, or asset class, right? And we drill down to the instrument. So if you say, hey, I'm looking for information on callable corporates, who has that information? So what our system will show you is not only the sources that have that information, but where those sources live in the aggregate vendor universe, right? So a source sells to an aggregate and says, hey, our data is available on these 7 platforms.
So you're providing a data discovery tool, a tool to
That is
enable
correct.
somebody, some person or some firm to find things from this vast universe of all the different, so that,
And
and all the coding enables that. And then
that
I'm also, so that's your cataloging side of things. And then on the inventory side, that same coding, you can query, I am a firm and I'm sitting in my firm, and my job is to then find out what we've got, what we have, and then I can
this
use
is
that.
this is really the exciting part about this. Is so let me separate the aspects for a second, because there's a lot to cover and there is a lot to unpack.
we, we're going to have part two of this because we're at 45 minutes. So bear in mind, we've got about 10-15 minutes. We won't
Okay,
cover everything. So let's cover the most important stuff.
so let me break this down a couple of ways. The first is, the next generation of our system will allow for much deeper data discovery, but not just in financial services. The ability for any financial services firm, which are currently our customers, and then we will be launching our directory globally for any data, which will allow all data providers to come register their data, get a code for down to the field level. Every field level is coded, right? In financial services speak, hey, I'm providing foreign exchange pricing data. What's the instrument? Well, if the instrument has a curve, what are the tenors that you're providing for? If the instrument is spot for foreign exchange, there is no curve because that trades cash. And then what are the fields available? What desk is it from? What are the currency pairs? We capture all of that data. And then what are the fields available? Well, one vendor will have bid, offer, bid size, offer size, mid, end of day. The next vendor may have different data fields, those and more or less, or whatever that is. So we will have that discovery coming up. And we're actually working with a number of the very large vendors in cataloging down to that field level. So that's the first part. The other part is as the company grows and the discussions we're having with non-financial services firms that are interested in our technology and our patents will allow us to create a data directory that is universal. So anyone that has our directory will be able to not only find their industry, but be able to find information from other industries. It is not a one-day problem. It is not something we're going to solve tomorrow. It goes back to painting the fourth bridge, right? It'll be constant, but as our technology increases, so will the ability for us to provide a much wider breadth of data. The second part of that is, what are the usage rights associated? And that's our second patent. And that patent was issued 2 weeks ago now. Very, very excited about it. And I think that Max references it in his article. So what that is we have read now thousands and thousands and thousands of documents. We've also negotiated a lot of these documents in a prior company, the consulting company I mentioned. So what we've done is we've cataloged everything we've seen, and it's a never-ending catalog. This is definitely painting the fourth bridge on both the identifier side as well as the usage rights side, because there are usage rights now that we didn't think about 10 years ago. No one was thinking about.
And they're constantly changing.
Of course. Just like there are asset classes that exist now that didn't exist, right? 15 years ago, no one was talking about crypto data. No one was talking about ESG data, right? And so then we move that into the usage rights. The usage rights, as we know, of publishing, printing, sharing, right? Storing. And then you get into derivative works, and there's a whole waterfall of derivative works, analytics, now LLMs and SLMs, benchmarks, pricing, et cetera, et cetera. What is that data for? Now, our code captures the data out of the contract. So to be clear, if the contract's silent on a specific topic, we don't opine. We don't opine on anything. We actually just capture it as is. We do allow the firms to opine on their own. But one of the things that we have been contracted to build, which is very exciting for us, is an end user portal at a very large firm. So our end user portal is going to allow the end user, whether it's a trader or an analyst or a portfolio manager anywhere around the world, to be able to see a number of different things. They're going to be able to see what they have. So this goes back to our identifier code. Hey, these are the products that I have licensed to me.
Yeah.
What those costs are, what the usage rights are on what I have. What does the firm have? I work at firm ABC. This is what I have, but this is what's available in the firm that I could potentially ask for a license. What are the usage rights within that firm? So our technology will allow to say, hey, I want to publish a report on ESG, what's available in the firm. And they'll say, hey, these 5 vendors do have publishing rights that are permitted uses. These 30 vendors have been silent on the product. You have to go get some opinion from either market data or legal on that, because we don't code to anything that's silent. I can't tell you, it doesn't say you can't publish. It doesn't say you can publish. Can you publish? No, we don't opine on.
But there's something in between silent and published. Contracts are written in, well, I'm using the word cautiously, natural language. I don't think it is very natural. I said this on a different podcast. It's legalese. It's written in a funny way that lawyers love to write contracts. And a problem that the industry often wrestles with, it's often ambiguous. It needs other lawyers to argue about what it actually means.
Yeah, so that conversation on the ambiguity, I'm going to leave for a podcast that you and I will have in about a year's time, because there's a number of things that we're working on that will hopefully, again, goes back to our ethos. Our ethos is to eliminate or at least reduce the frictions in the marketplace.
I'm hearing you. You said if it's silent, we leave it alone. I presume in the interim, if it's ambiguous, you also leave it alone. But if there's enough content that isn't ambiguous, then even if you're only solving 50, 60% of the problem, that's an awful lot better than not solving any of the problem. Am I putting it in the right terms?
You are exactly putting it in the right terms, and it's the starting point for us. So I'll give you an example of what we can code. Let's say there is a permitted use. So they're typically permitted and prohibited use clauses in either a master agreement or a service level agreement or at the product agreement. One of our tools digitizes those contracts. What we do is we build what we call document family trees. Hey, there's one master agreement, but it governs 7 different product purchases. Although product purchase 4 has language that supersedes the language in the master agreement on a specific clause. That's part of our technology. However, what we do is we say, okay, there's permitted use. So let's say the language says, yes, you can publish this data. However, with the exception of, you can publish this data in any geography with the exception of China or Russia. You must wait 72 hours. There's a 72-hour embargo on the data before you can publish it. If you publish that data, you must notify the vendor. You must source the vendor, and you must use the vendor's logo with a certain quality of whatever that logo quality looks like. So what we do is we capture that language in permitted use. There is an exception, and there are required actions. So our last patented code basically captures 4 categories, but under those 4 categories, there's a whole litany of tables that we go to extract that. The first is permitted use. The second is prohibited use. The third is exceptions and required actions. So we take a category. Category in this case is publishing, and it can be publishing, sharing, printing, again, the whole litany of derivative works. So we say, here is the category for which this is defined. It is either permitted or prohibited from the language. Prohibited use. You cannot do this, right? So we say, hey, this category, this permitted use says this, and we capture that in a string. And here are the exceptions and the required actions. And there's some other secret sauce, again, that we'll talk about in about a year.
I'm conscious of time, so we're going to have to wrap up. I mean, you and I could go on forever. We do normally when we're not recording a podcast. We're each guilty of that. But what you were just defining, I've been following this whole subject for many years, and I remember in the early stages of this, I'm going to mention a company, I think Axon did this, and they're now owned by TRG Screen, but it was even thought of doing this myself, which is going in and summarizing. It was a precursor to putting a digital rights management, but summarizing these really lengthy exchange contracts. And the problem was the exchanges would never approve it. They would never say, we acknowledge that summarization. So I'm imagining in your scenario, you're providing this tool, this capability to all the users of all this data, saying what they can and can't use. But I'm guessing that you have to have a little health warning saying, look, this is delivered in good faith and to all the best of our abilities is accurate. But at the end of the day, we can't promise that XYZ exchange won't sue the hell out of you because you've actually done something wrong.
So there are 2 aspects to this, David. The second aspect, again, saving for a podcast for next year, because we're really excited about some of the stuff that's coming out of Vendex. But for right now, what we are doing is we are creating a starting point for not only the market data management teams, but also the end user to be able to say from the contract, it states this. Now, when we get into the ambiguity, again, there's got to be a starting point to start the conversation, whether you're starting, if I'm an end user and I'm starting that conversation either with my market data team or my legal team, there has to be a starting point to understand. One of the other things too that we have noticed is, 30 years ago, yeah, I'm old. When I was trading bonds, I didn't know that I wasn't able to print a screen and send it to the salesperson to send it to their client. I didn't know that because I wasn't aware, but there were rights around what I was doing that I was probably jeopardizing. And the idea now in today's environment, especially in Europe with the regulations, there is much more governance and much more the consuming institutions, consumers of data, especially in financial services, are keen to be compliant with the contract because of, I think that's where we're going. And secondly, is because it is a headache. They get audited, they've done something wrong, fine, there's a lawsuit.
I think most customer firms, most consumers that do want to comply. There's reputational risk.
I think that is the case.
So, Richard, we really could go on. There's so much more to talk about, but we've got to wrap it up. I want to make sure these podcasts are long enough for somebody on a dog walk and listen in on their
I
Apple Podcasts or in their daily commute. I think that's where people are listening to this. But as I promised when we set off on this conversation, wrap up. We talked about a lot, not everything. If there were a couple of points in 2 or 3 minutes that you just wanted to make sure that people knew, understood, that we haven't talked about already, that you just wanted to ram home, here is your chance.
well, so where I think, again, speaking as the founder and CEO of Vendex, our goal is to really create a better solution for the future of all data. We are seeing, we have reports that say data is going to increase tenfold in the next 6 years. Just an unbelievable amount of data. The appetite for data in today's environment is much greater than it's ever been. And that's not just financial services. Our years in my background are financial services, just like the barcode started in groceries, we're starting in financial services. But data is owned by somebody. Somebody has created it. There is intellectual property there. We are keen to make sure that A, it's discoverable, and B, it's protected. When you create something, you want to either, if you're a music artist, you want to get paid for your music. People talk about these aggregate vendors and, oh, they're charging too much. And I'm not going to opine on that, but I do know that it's very expensive, very hard work to bring all this data together and normalize it. And if you're creating data, you have created something that is of value and should be protected, whether it's financial services or across the board. Our goal, again, is to make sure that we're representing the vendors, representing the consumers, all in a level playing field. And that is so critical for the future of the data industry, is that both sides, while there are frictions there, I want to pay less, you want to charge me more, whatever that is.
It was ever thus.
There has to be a meeting place, and our job as a company is to create create solutions for both sides that benefit both sides, right?
Richard, that's a good play. Unfortunately, I'm shocked the audience is going to miss out on us doing a duet about the market data industry on that guitar behind you. But we'll hold that. We'll do the market data. You have to string a couple. Yeah, that's it. So look, Richard, thank you so much. And I dread to think what time in the morning in San Francisco this was when we started. It's a Friday evening for me, but I think normally our conversations are a dreadful early morning for you.
That's never a problem, David. First of all, thank you so much for asking me to join your podcast. It's truly an honor. I always enjoy our conversations. And as you said, we could go on for hours and hours, but like I said, there's more to come from Vendex that we're really excited about. So we'll save for the future.
So I'm going to say cheerio, Richard. Talk to you soon. And I'm going to stop the recording.